It was a Sunday morning when my phone rang. I was brushing my teeth, halfway through a groggy routine, when the name, home, lit up my screen. I didn't expect anything urgent. Dad often but dialed me, or asked if I'd seen the remote he lost in 2007. But this time, it wasn't his voice. It was the paramedic. He's breathing, but it's shallow. We're taking him to Mercy General. Are you his next of kin? I froze. The toothbrush slipped from my hand and clattered into the sink. I could barely process the words as I grabbed my coat, my keys, and my shaking hands. Yes, I told them. I'm on my way. The drive was a blur. Every red light felt like sabotage. Every pedestrian crossing felt like a personal attack on time. My mind kept racing with memories of my dad, him humming Sinatra while making pancakes, him correcting my grammar mid-argument, him watching the same war documentary for the 100th time. Now he was in an ambulance, alone. As soon as I reached the ER, I texted my brother. Dad collapsed. He's in the emergency room. Come now. It took 10 minutes for a response to come through. We're busy with Margaret. That was it. No follow-up question. No. Is he okay? No. What hospital? Just a cold, clipped message with her name slapped at the end like punctuation. I stared at it, thinking surely he misunderstood. So I replied, They think it's cardiac-related. He's not conscious. I'm alone here. This time, the response was faster. I wish it hadn't been. You're always dramatic. Stop guilt-tripping me. That's when the cold in the hospital waiting room reached my bones. I wanted to scream. Or cry. Or throw my phone across the fluorescent-lit tiles. But I didn't. I sat down, clenched my jaw, and breathed through the betrayal. Margaret, his girlfriend of 6 months. She had him wrapped around her red manicured fingers like a puppet. Ever since she entered our lives, I had been slowly replaced. My brother stopped coming to family dinners. He missed Dad's birthday. He skipped Thanksgiving, said Margaret had a wellness retreat. And now, when Dad was fighting to breathe, he chose her. I remember looking around the waiting room. A woman sobbing into her coffee. A teenage boy pacing. A man staring into space, his hands clenched into fists. And me, sitting still, seething quietly. I hadn't cried yet. Not because I wasn't scared, but because my fear had hardened into something sharper. After 2 hours, a nurse called me in. I followed her down the hall, past doors with numbers and codes, until we reached Dad's room. He looked pale, tubes trailing from his arm, oxygen hissing quietly. His eyes fluttered open just a little, then closed again. I touched his hand gently. Still warm. Still here. I'm here, Dad, I whispered. You're not alone. And he wasn't. I stayed. Through the blood pressure checks, through the murmurs of cardiologists, through the clatter of machines that monitored every beat of the man who raised me. I stayed, even when my brother didn't show up. That night, I got one more text from him. It read, Let me know if it's serious. Margaret gets anxious around hospitals. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I realized something I had refused to see for years. Loyalty wasn't blood deep. It was proven in moments like these, when things fall apart, and you either show up or you don't. My brother didn't. And I would never forget that. The days after Dad's collapse blended into each other like fog. Hospitals have a strange way of making time elastic. Long stretches of silence pierced by sudden alarms, gentle nurses, curt doctors, and the constant beeping that reminds you life is both fragile and mechanical. I stayed beside him every day. I handled the paperwork, the insurance forms, the consent documents. I made decisions I was never prepared to make, like whether he should be sedated for a cardiac procedure, or who would be listed as an emergency contact. My brother? Not once did he call to check in. What he did do, though, was send me a Venmo request, a $40 charge for Margaret's birthday dinner, with the message, Since you missed it. I stared at it in disbelief. My dad was in the ICU, and this man thought I owed him a dinner tab? I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a folder on my phone, created a new album, and titled it Receipts. That folder would become sacred. It started with a screenshot of that Venmo request. Then, every text, every cold comment, every proof of absence, I saved them all. The missed calls that never came, the one-word replies, the moments he chose Margaret over family. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was documentation. Because I knew, sooner or later, they'd try to rewrite the story. And when they did, I'd be ready. Back at the hospital, Dad was improving. Slowly. He needed a stent, blood thinners, and follow-up appointments. I took time off work, burned through my vacation days, then my sick days. My manager wasn't thrilled, but I didn't care. This was my father. I wasn't going to leave him just because life got inconvenient. Meanwhile, my brother posted vacation photos on Instagram. He and Margaret sipping wine in Napa. Smiling selfies at a vineyard. #grateful, he wrote. I screenshotted those too. 2 weeks in, the hospital released Dad, but he couldn't live alone yet. He needed assistance, mobility help, meal prep, constant monitoring for any signs of relapse. I offered to take him in temporarily. Rearranged my apartment. Bought a cot for myself and gave him my bed. Made low-sodium meals. Learned how to monitor blood pressure like it was second nature. I called my brother once, just once, to ask if he could pick up some medication on his side of town. His response? I don't want to upset Margaret. Hospitals already stress her out. That was the last time I asked for anything. The narrative soon began to shift. My aunt, our dad's sister, called me one evening. Your brother says you're blowing things out of proportion, she said gently. He told us Dad's doing fine now. That you're just being overly sensitive, making him look bad. I didn't argue. Instead, I forwarded her a screenshot of his message. Let me know if it's serious. Margaret gets anxious around hospitals. She didn't reply after that. But I could feel the whispering start behind the scenes. At the next family dinner, one dad insisted on attending because he missed normal life. I brought him, bundled in a coat, cautious with his steps. My brother showed up late, of course. With Margaret. She didn't greet me. Just air-kissed Dad, sat across the table, and ordered wine like it was a spa day. Halfway through the meal, my brother raised his glass and said, We're just glad Dad's okay. But I think we all need to admit this was kind of overblown, don't you think? My hand clenched around my fork. Overblown? I had spent sleepless nights beside machines that beeped warnings. I had negotiated with billing departments, deciphered medical jargon, fed him, bathed him, lifted him when he was too weak to stand. And now he wanted to make it sound like I overreacted? I didn't respond then. But that night, I uploaded every medical invoice, every prescription, every hospital statement into my receipts folder. Then I backed it up, cloud, hard drive, USB. I knew they'd try again. I wasn't going to be caught unprepared. The real turning point came when Dad's health insurance denied part of his hospital claim. He was facing a $6,000 bill, money he didn't have. I offered to cover it. Quietly. No grand speech. No public announcement. Just paid it and moved on. A week later, I overheard Margaret telling someone at a gathering. If it weren't for us, I don't know how he would have managed. My boyfriend really stepped up. My boyfriend really stepped up. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I went home, pulled up the bank transfer receipt, and added it to the folder. That weekend, I sat down and compiled a document, 40 pages. Labeled, dated, organized. Every expense I covered. Every text. Every absence. Every lie. I didn't plan on using it. But knowing I had it? That was power. Then came the fundraiser. Margaret set up a GoFundMe titled, Help Our Dad Recover. Our Dad. They asked for $10,000. Claimed Dad had been abandoned by the system, that they were struggling to support him. Photos of him looking frail, taken without my knowledge. A sob story that made my blood boil. They raised $7,000 in 3 days. I posted one screenshot on my private account. Just one. It read, "You said I was dramatic? But here's the bill I paid when no one else did." No caption. No hashtags. Just that. Messages flooded in. From cousins. From coworkers. From distant relatives. People asked questions. Quietly, respectfully. And I answered with facts. No bitterness. Just proof. Suddenly, Margaret's GoFundMe vanished. My brother stopped replying to messages. I didn't need revenge. I had truth. And I had receipts. It started with a whisper, an offhand comment passed through the family grapevine. "You're making it all about yourself," my aunt told me one day over the phone. "Your brother said he's concerned you're overattached. That maybe caring for Dad has become more about control than compassion." That word, control, stuck in my throat like a thorn. After everything I'd done, after the nights I spent with a damp cloth against Dad's forehead, the endless pharmacy runs, the late-night calls with insurance agents, I was now being painted as the manipulative one. I didn't argue. I just smiled into the silence, nodded even though she couldn't see me, and said, "Okay." Because deep down, I'd already made a decision. I wasn't going to fight them anymore. Let them have it. Let them handle everything. Let's see how far their version of love and loyalty really went when things got complicated. That night, I sat down with Dad and gently explained that I'd be stepping back. I told him I would still visit, still call, but that my brother wanted to take a more active role. Dad looked at me long and hard, his lips tight, a familiar sadness in his eyes. He didn't say much, he never did when it came to family tension. But when I stood to leave, he squeezed my hand a little longer than usual. "I trust you," he whispered. It nearly broke me. But I smiled anyway, kissed him on the forehead, and walked out. The very next day, I texted my brother. "You're right. Maybe I am too involved. From this week forward, you can take care of Dad's needs. I won't interfere." He replied within 5 minutes. "Finally. Thank you. Margaret and I were saying this for weeks." That's all I needed. For the first time in over 3 months, I allowed myself to sleep through the night. No alarms. No late-night thermometer checks. No tracking pills in a plastic organizer. I breathed. I stretched. I even went to brunch. It was almost peaceful. Until the first call came. "Hey, did you cancel the meal delivery service?" my brother asked, sounding irritated. "Yes," I replied calmly. "It was under my name. I figured you'd want to set up your own." Pause. "Okay. But you didn't tell me the meds had to be refilled today." I didn't answer immediately. Just let that silence stretch long enough to make him uncomfortable. "They're all listed on the chart I left in the folder on Dad's kitchen counter," I said. "The one labeled in red." "I didn't see it." "Well," I said simply, "it's there." Click. 2 days later, another call. "Dad says the nurse didn't show up." "That's because I was the nurse," I answered. "You'll need to hire one now. Or take shifts." He muttered something about me being spiteful. I didn't respond. I had nothing left to prove. For weeks, I had been treated like a nuisance, dramatic, emotional, overbearing. Now I was just absent. And absence has weight. Suddenly, grocery deliveries had to be managed. Bills had to be paid. Medication tracked. Appointments scheduled. My brother, who once rolled his eyes every time I updated the family group chat with Dad's status, was now knee-deep in responsibilities he didn't even know existed. And Margaret? She lasted 1 week. Just one. According to Dad, she complained constantly about the smell of ointments, the noise of the oxygen tank, the inconvenience of adjusting her social schedule. One night, she stormed out after Dad accidentally spilled water on her silk scarf. "I don't do caretaking," she reportedly told my brother. I found that poetic. A week later, my brother called again. This time, it was different. No sarcasm. No indignation. Just frustration and exhaustion bleeding through the phone line. "Can we talk?" he asked. "About what?" "About this setup. I thought it'd be easier. But it's more than I expected." "Oh?" I said softly. "I thought I was being dramatic." He didn't respond to that. Just exhaled. "I need help," he said eventually. "Maybe we could split things again?" I let the silence linger again. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed to remember how I got here. How many times I'd cried behind closed doors, how many nights I spent wondering why no one else saw the weight I was carrying. And now, finally, he did. But I wasn't going back. "I'm happy to share the list of services I used," I said. "The nurse contact, the housekeeper, the pharmacy who does deliveries. But I won't be stepping back in. Not like before." "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm done being your safety net. I kept things afloat while being insulted. You said I was a burden. So I'm stepping away. For good." He paused, then muttered, "I didn't mean that literally." "But you said it," I replied. "And words matter." He didn't argue. In the weeks that followed, the cracks widened. Dad's bills were stacking. Medical supply costs, co-pays, dietary needs, none of which my brother had budgeted for. He called the hospital billing department in a panic, and was told the grace period was ending. That they'd be turning it over to collections unless a payment was made. And then came the kicker. He tried to access the emergency savings account Dad and I had created, back when the first heart scare happened. But he couldn't. Because only 2 names were authorized, mine and Dad's. He called again. "You need to transfer access to me," he demanded. "I don't need to do anything," I said, calm as ever. "Dad and I set that up for emergencies. Not for someone who shows up when it's convenient." "You're being manipulative." "No. I'm being clear. You wanted the responsibility. Now you have it." After that, he didn't call for a while. But the final moment of clarity came during a family video call, Dad's idea. He wanted to check in with both of us, to see how we were managing. My brother looked pale, thinner than usual, Margaret nowhere in sight. I could tell the stress had settled into his bones. Dad asked how things were going. My brother gave a vague answer. Then, out of nowhere, he looked at me and said, "I didn't know it was this hard." I didn't gloat. Didn't smile. Didn't nod. I just said, "Now you do." Dad looked between us, and for the first time in months he smiled, just a little. Later that night, he called me privately. "He's trying," Dad said, not defensively, but almost sadly. "I know," I replied. "But trying now doesn't erase what happened before." He sighed. "I just want peace between you two." "I do too," I said. "But peace doesn't mean pretending." I didn't hate my brother. I never did. I just stopped covering for him. And that was my real freedom. It was Thanksgiving. The house smelled like roasted turkey and cloves, like cinnamon and familiarity. The same old ceramic plates came out from storage, the same table runner with faded autumn leaves. My aunt brought her signature cranberry sauce that no one ever ate but everyone politely praised. The dining room buzzed with chatter, the clinking of glasses, the rise and fall of conversations layered over each other. And for the first time in months, my father was seated at the head of the table. He looked thinner, yes, but stronger too. His eyes had regained that quiet steadiness, the kind that said, "I've seen more than you think." He wore a dark cardigan over a button-up shirt, and his silver hair had been neatly combed back. He even made a joke when he sat down, something about surviving death just to hear Aunt Linda's mashed potatoes were still undercooked. People laughed. The moment felt almost normal. Almost. I sat quietly at the end of the table, near the window. A spot I had always liked, close to the cold November breeze that slipped through the old glass, a little distant from the main cluster of chairs. I wasn't hiding. I just wasn't ready to be front and center anymore. My brother sat across from Dad, a seat he'd avoided for years. He looked different too. Gone was the smug posture, the barely concealed irritation he used to carry into family dinners. His shoulders were lower now, not with defeat, but with humility. Margaret wasn't there. She hadn't been to any family gatherings since the caregiving arrangement collapsed. The food came out. We passed dishes. There were jokes, even laughter. I sipped my wine and watched the rituals unfold, these strange dances that families perform when trying to pretend everything is okay. Then, halfway through the meal, just as my cousin reached for a second helping of stuffing, my brother cleared his throat. And the table went still. Everyone turned. He set down his fork, looked straight ahead, not at Dad, not at his plate, but at me, and said, "I need to say something." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was anticipatory. Like everyone had been waiting for this, even if they didn't know what this was. He continued, "A few months ago, I said things I shouldn't have. I dismissed things I didn't understand. I made someone I love feel small for doing the right thing." No one moved. I didn't blink. I watched from the sidelines while someone else carried the weight. All of it. And I criticized them while they did it. I let pride and... He glanced away briefly. Other influences cloud what should have been obvious. Someone's glass clinked softly on the table, a minor sound that echoed like thunder in that moment. He looked at me directly. "I'm sorry." And then he looked down again quietly, like the weight of the words had cost him more than he expected. Everyone was still staring at me now, waiting for me to say something. But I didn't. I just nodded. Not coldly, not dismissively. Just enough to let the moment land. To let the apology stand unbuffered. I didn't rush to make it easier for him. I didn't wrap it up in a joke or a casual "it's okay." Because it wasn't okay. Not yet. Some things deserve their full weight. And some silences are louder than any reply. The rest of dinner moved on. Slowly. Carefully. As though the room had shifted and everyone was trying to find their footing again. But something had cracked open, something honest, raw, and necessary. After dessert, I stepped outside for air. The chill bit at my fingers, and I welcomed it. My father came out a few minutes later, his steps measured, his breath visible in the cold. He stood beside me on the porch, looking out at the street where the leaves had started to curl at the edges. "He meant it," Dad said quietly. "I know." I didn't think he'd ever say it out loud. Me neither. We stood there in the cold, two people stitched together by blood and grief and 100 quiet nights filled with unsaid things. "You handled all of this with more grace than I could have," he added. "I didn't always feel graceful," I said. "That's the thing about grace," he replied. "You don't feel it. But others do." A soft gust of wind passed between us. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed. A dog barked. Life, continuing as it does, indifferent to our private climaxes. Inside, the others were starting to gather their coats, thank Aunt Linda for hosting, hug each other goodbye. My brother caught my eye through the window. I didn't smile, but I didn't look away either. There was something in that look, an understanding, maybe. A truce. Later that night I got a text from him. "Thank you for letting me try. I don't expect things to be fixed. But I'm here now. And I'll keep showing up." I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. But because I believed him. And for the first time in a long time, belief was enough. For a long time, I believed that love meant staying. That being a good child, a good sibling, a good person, meant showing up over and over again, even when it hurt, even when no one acknowledged the weight you carried. I thought that if I just gave more, tried harder, sacrificed more of myself, then maybe I'd earn something back. Recognition. Gratitude. Respect. Something. But that's not how life works. Love, real love, isn't measured by how much you endure in silence. It's measured by the boundaries you protect, even from those you love most. It's knowing when to step forward, and when to step back. This story, at its core, isn't just about family. It's about identity. About learning to define your worth without waiting for others to validate it. It's about choosing dignity over appeasement. Because there's a very specific kind of pain that comes from being constantly needed but never appreciated. You become invisible in plain sight, a lifeline for others who never once think to ask if you're drowning too. And for a while I lived in that space. I picked up the pieces. I answered the late-night calls. I cleaned up the messes. I was the reliable one, the steady hand, the responsible sibling. And they resented me for it. Because responsibility, in families like mine, is rarely rewarded. It's expected. It becomes the standard against which everyone else gets to measure their effort, without doing the work. But when I stepped back, truly stepped back, I realized something powerful. Absence reveals truth. When you stop carrying everything, you get to see who tries to lift what's left behind. And sometimes, no one does. Sometimes they flounder. Sometimes they fall apart. And sometimes they finally begin to understand the weight you bore without complaint. That's what happened with my brother. It wasn't punishment. I didn't step away to get back at him. I stepped away because I was no longer willing to be the emotional sponge for everyone's avoidance. I needed to reclaim space for myself, to grieve in peace, to heal without bitterness. And oddly enough, it was in that silence that change began. People learn from discomfort more than from confrontation. When he was finally forced to sit in the space I once occupied, he saw it for what it really was: exhausting, messy, thankless. But also deeply human. He realized that showing up isn't about grand gestures. It's about consistency, humility, and the willingness to stay when things get inconvenient. And that's another lesson this journey taught me: you cannot force accountability. You can only create space for it to grow. Sometimes that means not answering the phone. Sometimes it means letting others fail. Sometimes it means saying no, and letting the silence do what words cannot. It also taught me the difference between guilt and responsibility. Guilt tells you that you're bad for not doing more. Responsibility reminds you of your limits, your priorities, your humanity. And those limits matter. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't keep setting yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they wouldn't do the same for you. So, what's the life lesson? It's this: you are allowed to choose peace over obligation. You are allowed to protect your time, your energy, your heart. You are allowed to say, "I've done enough," even if others disagree. You are allowed to grieve the role you hope someone would play in your life, and then move forward without them in that role. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconnection. Sometimes it means letting go of the fantasy that they'll ever be who you needed, and learning to live anyway, and love anyway, and heal anyway. At that Thanksgiving table, when my brother apologized, I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, but because I wanted the moment to be his. Apologies should not be extracted or performed under pressure. They should be chosen. I gave him the gift of silence, not as punishment, but as witness. I let his words exist in the space between us, heavy and honest. And in doing so, I freed myself from the cycle. So here's what I'll leave you with. If you're carrying too much, put it down. If you're always the one stepping up, take a step back. If you're waiting for someone to notice your sacrifice, stop. Notice yourself. Acknowledge yourself. And never, ever apologize for demanding respect. Sometimes, walking away isn't the end of love. Sometimes, it's the beginning of self-respect.